Hello everyone, this is Frankly Fun's channel. Recently, I talked to Peter Walker. Mr. Walker is a frequent speaker on China-US relations and since retired from senior partner at McKinsey. He visited China for more than 80 times in the past 15 years and he put all of his experience and insightful observations into his new book, Powerful, Different, Equal, which was published in the United States in 2019. I have known Mr. Walker for years, and we all admire his efforts of speaking, of telling balanced stories about China. In this podcast, we touch upon topics like freedom in my hometown, Xinjiang and Hong Kong. Okay, first of all, I want to say congratulations for your new book. You shared your thoughts on the twists and turns of China-US relations, like the reason behind, and based on your unique experience of interacting with Chinese people. There are some highlighted assumptions that the US government and Western media have made about China in recent years, such as Chinese people suffering oppression, like some Western media will cite the examples of Hong Kong and Xinjiang. You know, I come from Xinjiang, so I really want to know what's your take on these assumptions and the reason behind them.
You had this situation where, without a real attention to the facts, a story was being created really by the press and reinforced by Trump. Biden took over. I think we're all very hopeful that it's going to be a more relaxed relationship. It's not off to a great start, but I think part of it is we understand that Biden has a number one priority is his domestic agenda. He can't afford to come across as soft on China. So he's I think, doing everything he can to appear to be tough. But we have to remember that, if you go back about 5 or 6 years ago, Biden was quoted as saying, China is not our enemy. Well, the reason I wrote my book was after making about 80 trips to China over a 15-year period of time. I got so tired of reading in the Western press that the Chinese people were unhappy, oppressed, they had no freedom. And I said, why is it that I've met hundreds, if not thousands of people over that 15-year period of time? And what I found were people are hardworking, very family oriented, very focused on advancement and education, and increasingly proud of what China's accomplished. So I said, why is this picture so different from what I saw? And that's when I created the theme that we're talking about two great countries with very different histories and cultures. And that explains a lot of those misunderstandings. But at the end of the day, when you look at the international research that's done, um, by Pew Foundation and Pew Research and by Edelman, which does what they call a trust measure of how people feel about the government. Are they performing well or not? How do you feel about your future? Will you have a better life 5 years from now or not? And when you look at those measures, China is about the highest rated country in terms of support of the people. Now, if you look at Hong Kong and Xinjiang, yeah, I mean, obviously, you're talking about two very different histories. I think from my point of view, when I talk to Chinese mainland people, what they remember very clearly is that Great Britain took Hong Kong as a spoil of the Opium War, which was clearly one of the most immoral wars ever waged anywhere when you look at what the underlying motivations were. China or Great Britain agreed that China would reestablish control over Hong Kong back in 1997. But I think when you saw the extradition law put in place that said people from Hong Kong can be extradited to China for justice, which, I think probably in retrospect wasn't a good thing for China to do because it created a lot of the pushback and the riots. But I also am sympathetic with the Chinese government because the reality is those riots in Hong Kong were ultimately out of control. They were increasingly violent and destructive. And it became clear that they weren't just rioting about one country, two systems. They wanted to return Hong Kong to exactly what it always was under Great Britain. And that was never going to happen. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, Hong Kong is now going to deteriorate significantly. But again, I go back to what I said before. The people in the Chinese government are smart. They understand that Hong Kong is an important economic center, and they're going to enact changes that will protect the business community and the ability of the Hong Kong economy to thrive. Will there be some hit because some corporations will say we don't want to do business with them? Yeah, of course there will be some, but it's going to be managed in a thoughtful way. I know people in Hong Kong who would basically say, this hasn't really changed my life at all. I work the way I always work. I make the money I always made. I can basically do what I want to do, except I can't organize against the government. And there's certain things that undermine the government that I'm not allowed to say. But if you ask them, is that an important encroachment on their freedom? The ones I talk to say no. And that's true. When I go to China, I ask especially young people and young people from China who were going to school in the U.S. And I said, how do you feel about freedom? And they basically say, if you go back to the old Hukou system, where I was told you're going to live in this apartment, you can't leave the town without permission. If you want to get married, you need permission, et cetera, et cetera. They basically say the same thing to me. I can work where I want to work. I can go to school where I want to go to school. I can live wherever I want. So I can carry out my life. And what I can't do is organize against the government. Why do I want to do that? It's the only government we have. And China has done very well under this government. So why do I want to protest? So a lot of this is the media putting a spin on it and
Yeah.
basically projecting Western values that are very different from Chinese values.
So I always sometimes I'm confused, like, what is the freedom? I feel like I'm very free, you know, but some West media they always say like we don't have freedom. So I'm just wondering what is the freedom you're talking about?
Yeah.
So
Look, I mean, it's a very different perspective because if you look at obviously a very sensitive issue now is the treatment of the Uyghurs, which you're familiar with given where you live. But, the U.S. looks at it very differently. The U.S. says any attempt to reduce individual rights of in anywhere in the world is unacceptable, and therefore they simply look at what's the treatment of the Uyghurs, which actually I don't agree with. I don't think it's been good for China as a country because it's hurt its reputation. I'm not sure what the value is, but I also understand it that the purpose of the internment was the fact that China had a number of serious Islamic terrorist events, and given the importance of stability in China, it was very high priority to be able to eliminate those events. And that has happened. I think the question for China and the question for the US is the medicine worth the cure? And I think that's a fair question. I think in the US, the answer would be a resounding no, that you are really seriously hurting the quality of life for those people. And in China, the government would probably say domestic terrorism was a real problem and we solved it. And because we're a collective society, we look at the well being of all of society as a whole and feel that that benefit makes it worth it. And you could have debates all day long in terms of is there a right or wrong? And there isn't a right or wrong. It's going to come back to what each country is trying to do. But it is a major source of misunderstanding because in the US, it's very hard to understand why a country would do that to a segment of its population.
Okay, I've seen a lot of pictures about the security guard in Xinjiang. I do complain like it's inconvenient. Whenever I went back, I have to get through a lot of security checks. But I prefer to have somebody, protect me rather than being attacked by terrorists, right?
Yeah.
So I would rather to sacrifice my own convenience to change for a peaceful life. Last week, I went back to Xinjiang and I talked to a Uyghur village head, and he told me that how serious the terrorist has influenced the local villagers' life. For example, when people getting married, they always invite those religious people to join their wedding, and they're highly respected. But during those years, when they got married, they can't celebrate the wedding. Uyghur people, they really enjoy dancing and singing, particularly during some ceremonies. But those years can't do this. And during funerals, people were not allowed by some religious people to cry for losing their beloved families. So for me, it's ridiculous. What about those villagers? How they suffered from the extremist religious people's influence? Why
Yeah.
nobody, in the world to care about people during those years? When talking about I just really get emotional. So because I have heard a lot of stories, but when I read those reports from Western media recently, I just feel like you guys should know the whole picture, right?
Yeah.
You should talk to the local people, local villagers, how they think about the life before and after. And
Yeah.
I think like, we can't say every policy is perfect.
Yeah.
There's no perfect solutions. So
Yeah.
we have to minimize the side effect of that policy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you mentioned the whole issue of surveillance. I mean, I can tell you in the US, when people read that a criminal was caught on a video and is now in jail, they say,
Mm-hmm.
"Thank goodness we have a surveillance system." So you can't have it both ways. So if you want to have increased levels of safety, and you can catch people who are performing criminal acts, then you're going to have some level of surveillance. And we have a lot of surveillance in the US. That's why a lot of these crimes get caught and individuals get caught because we have it. But
Mm-hmm.
is somebody watching you? Yes. It's kind of like vaccines and COVID. You have to decide what's worth it to you, and it's a trade-off. It's a
Mm-hmm.
judgment,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right.
as
Quite
opposed to
right.
a simple
Mm-hmm.
story.
Shoot me a message and let me know how you feel.